get started.
You don't care where we sit? Anywhere?
Yeah, anywhere.
You have something on the bottom of your shoe there. Do you want to say here, say your first?
Yeah, exactly. It's really bright.
They are on. So you go through Friday also?
Friday.
Okay, we're going to get started. I want to welcome everybody to, I'm sure it's going to be an intriguing session, talking about electric utility strategies to achieve deep carbonization in 2030 and beyond. We have a great panel here, and it's nice to be at COP and feel the excitement and momentum building in the right direction in many different ways. Today's event is being co-hosted by ERM and Ceres. I've been a member of the Ceres Presidential Council for more than 10 years. Ceres has been very successful at increasing the ambition of corporate players in the U.S. to achieve deeper reductions. Ceres has a roadmap program for 2030 that's been real successful. Climate Action 100 plus initiative that's been just incredibly successful. And now they're launching an ambitious 2030 program to really accelerate decarbonization in 6 of the largest emitting sectors in the U.S. So look for more from Ceres. ERM is a global consulting company, probably the largest global pure play sustainability consulting company in the world, over 6,000 employees in 40 countries. ERM partners with key NGOs like Ceres and like the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. I work in the North America Climate Advisory Group, and we work with clients to create innovative strategies to reduce carbon emissions across the board in many sectors. So just to set the context a little bit today, we're dealing with the challenges of running a reliable and affordable electricity system for customers. But at the same time, it's all about achieving deep reductions. I think the reality of needing to achieve the reductions throughout the economy is becoming more and more real across the board. The electric sector has been one of the more prominent players in reducing emissions, 40% since 2005, which is pretty impressive through aggressive energy efficiency programs, the introduction of combined cycle natural gas, the transition of coal not being as prominent in the mix, and of course renewable energy becoming more affordable and deployable. But this is really about making substantial progress by 2030, setting the foundation for deeper reductions in the future. All of the companies here today happen to be Ceres members and very involved in Ceres, which is a signal. But they really are a leading group that I think are establishing model strategies, model approaches for not only U.S. electric utilities, but probably globally. So it's going to be, we'll get on to having each of my guests give a short presentation of their story, and then we'll have a conversation about how we're going to achieve these goals in the context of potentially some useful federal legislation. So Badar Khan is president of National Grid US. He has to worry about 20 million customers in New York, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. He has pretty much been recognized for his leadership role in the transition of restructuring markets, both retail and wholesale in the U.S. as well as in the U.K. He spent several years here in the UK working. He has deep experience both in the electric and the natural gas utility sector. He has a background in retail power, power generation, wholesale energy training, renewable energy, so he has quite the talented mix. Carolyn Choi is the Senior VP for Corporate Affairs at Southern Cal Edison. She's been in the game for 20 plus years, working certainly on the federal level on environmental policy, climate policy, but for 10 years now in California, which is a very challenging policy environment to say the least. But she's played a real role in helping to shape climate strategy in California, renewable energy targets, electric vehicle programs, and programs that support disadvantaged communities. So it's great to have Carolyn here. Melissa Lavinson was our next guest. She's a Senior VP at Pepco Holdings. She's a VP for Governmental and External Affairs. She has a key management role not only at Pepco, which is kind of DC, a little bit of Maryland, but for Delmarva Electric in Delaware and Atlantic City Electric in southern New Jersey. So she plays a key management role on strategy, outreach to NGOs, community leaders, state leaders, and really has played the leading role in developing Pepco Holdings' approach to climate. Most recently with a comprehensive climate solutions plan that was filed with the DC PUC, which really involves a whole bunch of integrated strategies and programs. So, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Badar, and we'll move along.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks to ERM and Ceres for hosting the discussion today. As Michael said, I run National Grid's U.S. business, which is it's primarily a electric, gas, and clean energy delivery company. So we transport energy from those that produce it to customers that use it. That's across the Northeast, so 20 million people. 2 years ago, we announced our commitment to net zero, and today we actually have lowered our emissions by around 70% versus 1990 levels. A year ago, we decided that we needed to include not just our direct emissions, so our scope 1 and 2, but also our indirect emissions, scope 3. And we spent a good part of the past year or so, 18 months, working with SBTI, the Science Based Targets Initiative, to validate the pathways that we've set out to achieve net zero for scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions reduction. We thought it was important that we did that. Our scopes 1 and 2 are actually only about 7% of our total emissions. Scope 3 is 90+%. We thought it was important that we took that step because of the role that we play as a electric and gas and energy company in enabling society-wide emissions reduction. This past week, we produced an update report. So we let out a pathway a year ago, and we said we would be transparent and produce a report every year that laid out our progress and how we're doing. And we did that this past week. And I'd just like to share some of those highlights with you, and also how we're thinking about our pathways. When we think about emissions reduction, we break it down into 3 sectors. So the role that we play in enabling decarbonization of energy supply, number 1. Number 2, decarbonization of transport. And then number 3, buildings and building heat. So for energy supply, we believe that we need to get to at least 80% clean, zero carbon energy by 2030. Over the last few years, we've signed contracts with large offshore generators to supply roughly half of our customers' load with zero carbon energy by the mid-2020s. These are long-term contracts that in some cases allow some of these generators to achieve their financing. Onshore, we've connected already over 100,000 distributed energy systems in our states. So these are solar and storage systems in Western Massachusetts, New York, and Rhode Island, which I think makes our utility the second largest utility with non-residential onshore distributed solar connections. We've also been proposing investments in transmission So, a couple of $1 billion to connect onshore wind, primarily in New York, to get it to load. And we're also modernizing and investing in our networks to allow us to not have to increase transmission capacity, but get better utilization of our capacity. We're also investing in smart meters and grid modernization technologies to allow entrepreneurs, who I think absolutely need to play a role here, capture the time and locational value of distributed resources to not just optimize the grid, but find ways to engage customers. So there's a lot there on energy supply. On transportation, we have looked at our state's pathways and our own pathway, and we figure we need about 1.2 million electric vehicles on the roads in our states, that's the northeastern states, by 2025, and 3 million by 2030. Today we have 100,000, so that's a 30-fold increase. Transportation represents 40% of emissions society-wide, so we think it's an incredibly important goal. We've already installed over 3,000 charging ports. We're not the auto manufacturer, but our role is to ensure that there's charging infrastructure. And we've sought approval for 50,000 charging ports, just under half of which have got approved already by regulators by 2025. So there's quite a lot there. Could talk more about the role of equity. So we're making sure that these charging stations are in environmental justice communities and publicly accessible locations. So it's not just the Tesla drivers that are getting the benefits of clean air. Lastly is buildings and heat. I think it's the toughest sector. We're clearly playing our role in methane reductions, so replacing leaky pipe, gas pipe, with plastic pipe to prevent the leaks. We've lowered emissions by 15% in just the last few years. That's replacing 300 or 400 miles of pipe. But more importantly, we need to get to a place where we're encouraging customers to switch their equipment in their homes. We need to convert all oil and propane-based forms of heating in the Northeast, which still exists in quite large numbers, to lower carbon, zero carbon alternatives by 2030. We're also working with our regulators and our stakeholders to ensure that the energy efficiency programs that we offer allow customers to use those incentives to convert directly to electric heat pumps, potentially also other lower carbon alternatives. With energy efficiency, our states are some of the leaders for energy efficiency across the United States. We're investing some $500 million a year in incentives for customers, but to get to our targets, we need to double that by 2030. So there's a lot to do across the three sectors. Just two other things I'd like to call out. The first is the role of consumers. I think over the last decade, we've seen emissions reduction on the part of a relatively small number of actors across society. Over the next 10 years, we're going to need to see regular people engage in ways that they haven't today. And I think that requires not just utilities, but entrepreneurial, technology, consumer-oriented companies to be part of the mix to scale up, partner with utilities and other organizations to find ways to engage customers to make not just one-and-done choices, but choices that where they're engaging in their consumption on a regular basis. To achieve that, 3 or 4 years ago, we set up something called National Grid Partners, which is our own corporate venture arm, an innovation arm. We've seeded it with $400 million of shareholder funding, and we're investing in entrepreneurs, minority investments in areas around energy and technology, and of course, for the clean energy transition. These are not just financial investments, but they're strategic. They allow us to help us see how entrepreneurs are thinking about engaging customers and potentially co-create them with them. We've deployed about 2/3 of that in over 30 minority investments. And the last thing I say before I wrap up is equity. It's incredibly important that we ensure that this transition is one that doesn't leave anyone behind. I think in societal transitions in the past, there has been a segment of society that's been left behind, and through our offerings, whether it's energy efficiency, renewable energy, decarbonizing transport, we need to ensure that all communities receive the benefits of clean air and the access to some of the new jobs that will be created as a result of this transition. So thank you for listening. Look forward to the discussion, and I'll hand over to Caroline.
Great. Thank you. I'll echo Badar on thanks to Ceres and ERM for hosting this really great panel. It's fun to come to COP and hear what others are doing. It's a real opportunity to share, but it's also a great opportunity just to learn so much from others. Edison International is a holding company that owns both Southern California Edison as well as Edison Energy. I work for both the holding company and the utility. I'll talk just a bit about Edison Energy and then focus most of my comments around Southern California Edison, the utility. Edison Energy is a really good part of our business, and they focus on commercial, industrial, and institutional customers, helping them with their energy portfolios, particularly on their sustainability journeys. So those companies primarily have adopted ESG goals, and Edison Energy helps them with their energy procurement, energy management, thinking through those opportunities to drive towards a more sustainable operation. Southern California Edison is the largest subsidiary of Edison International. It's a utility, electric only, that serves Southern California, about 50,000 square miles, 15 million customers. Very geographically diverse, from the coast to the desert to the high mountains, as well as very diverse in terms of population. So a number of languages that are spoken in our service area, and as we talk to our customers, working to make sure that we're talking to them and the customers, the languages that they are most comfortable with, and in a way that they want to be heard from us. So whether that's by email or by mail or by phone or by text, we work to try and make sure that we're communicating with those customers in the way that they are asking to be communicated with. Like National Grid, we are very invested in climate and assuring that the state achieves the goals that it has set for itself, which are very much aligned with the Paris Accord. So California has some of the most ambitious climate goals in the country, and it has an effort to hit net zero by 2045, similar to Paris, with a way step along the way of 40% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. And Southern California Edison, most of our effort is really focused in on how can we help the state achieve those goals through many of the same measures that we just heard about. So clean energy and electrification of parts of the economy that can leverage that clean energy for more aspects. And so today, Southern California Edison, about 43% of the power that we deliver to customers is emissions free. That comes from hydro, wind, solar, and a small slice of nuclear that comes from Arizona. But we're well on our way to achieving the 100% goal that the state has set by 2045. And one of the things that we've done is also just think through how do we achieve the goal in California in the most cost-effective way, economy-wide. So while there's so much attention on the power sector, and we do see the power sector being a driver for a lot of climate solutions, we also want to make sure that the state and others are thinking about an approach that really optimizes the approaches across all sectors of the economy. So we did a white paper back in 2019 called Pathway to 2045, and it shows that, yes, we're going to get to 100% emissions-free delivered energy. It also calls for significant transportation electrification, so 8 million vehicles on the road by 2030, towards 26 million passenger vehicles by 2045. Also, a great deal of the medium and heavy transport as well being electrified. Similar to the Northeast, transportation is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in California at 60%. If you add in the oil refining, it's almost 80%. So it's a real driver to hit the transportation emissions, not just for climate, which is super important, but we also have some of the worst air quality in Southern California. And so going to zero emission mobility also will really improve the air quality in Southern California, and particularly for the disadvantaged communities that live along many of the main transportation corridors that have suffered the most from the air pollution that we've experienced. So electrification, the transportation sector, and then building electrification. It's heat pumps, water heaters, space heating. And we did this paper in 2019. We updated it just about a month ago, really focusing again on this waste stop of 2030, because it's really critical for California to hit its 2030 goal in order to achieve 2045. We're doing a great job, really, in terms of the clean energy. We're well on track to hit the target. Where we are sort of falling behind is in transportation, and particularly in building electrification. So we should hit, knock on wood, 1 million vehicles by the end of this year in California. It's great progress. We're seeing significant adoption, particularly in the last year. And of course, you've seen the demand for vehicles just writ large with the supply chain issues. But that means that over the next 8 years, we basically have to get 1 million vehicles on the road each year to hit to the 8 million by 2030. So a lot of work to be done to raise awareness, to drive at the affordability, the accessibility of charging, and so we're working all those areas. For Edison, we have a significant transportation program. We're investing almost $800 million over the next 5 years to put in charging. The passenger vehicle side, we're trying to put 38,000 charging stations across the 50,000 square miles, with half of those in disadvantaged communities. Similar to National Grid, we really want to make sure that there are not communities left behind as we move towards that clean energy economy. So the passenger vehicle charging stations, particularly in the disadvantaged communities, will make sure that as vehicles become available, particularly used vehicles, that our customers can adopt them and have charging infrastructure available to them. We're also investing almost over $500 million in the medium and heavy duty space, so delivery vans, forklifts, and then the port. The Port of Long Beach is our largest customer. It's one of the largest ports in the world. They are moving towards electrification, and we are helping them with our programs as well. And then on the building side, we are actually about to put forward an application to the Commission for building electrification, and we will see how that flies. At the end of the day, it's not just equity, it's also about affordability. We have to make sure that this transition is an affordable one so that customers will adopt electric appliances, will adopt electric vehicles, want to go electric. And so we need to make sure that as we put forward these programs, ensure that our customers are able to take advantage of the clean energy choices that they have before them, that we do it in a way that assures the reliability of the system, resiliency of the system, particularly as more and more parts of the economy depend on electricity to power their systems, and then affordability so that we have that equity and fairness across all of our customer base. So I'll end there, talk more during questions.
Thanks very much, Caroline and Badar. And thanks, Michael, to ERM and Ceres for having me here today. It's a great opportunity to be here. Really appreciate it. As Michael said, I'm Melissa Lavinson. I head up Government External Affairs for Pepco Holdings. And Pepco Holdings, we are the holding company that has three major utilities: Atlantic City Electric in New Jersey, Delmarva Power, which serves Delaware and parts of Maryland, as well as Pepco, which serves the District of Columbia and Montgomery and Prince George's counties in Maryland. So we've got about 2 million customers across those jurisdictions, but we're also part of the Exelon family of companies that serves 10 million customers across the Mid-Atlantic and also in the Chicago area in Illinois. And you know what I've heard a lot so far in the conversation is a lot about partnership, a lot about affordability, equity, inclusivity, and the role that utilities can really play in driving a clean energy decarbonized future. And you know, when you think about it, utilities were really built to do big things. We are public service companies, right, that are purpose driven. And I can't think of a greater purpose right now than to kind of equitably and inclusively decarbonize our economy as quickly as possible and build resilience for the future. And that's why it's really exciting to be here at COP talking, because we've seen a lot of progress being made this week, I think, on commitments internationally. We've have heard a lot of great conversations, and that's all great. That's what's happened here, and it's building off of a lot of great commitments and progress that have been made over the past several years, particularly in the business community, and I think, as we heard, among electric utilities, and that's really fantastic. And so when I really think about it, you know, at Pepco Holdings and Exelon, right, we've also made similar commitments to Edison and National Grid. We recently announced at Exelon our Path to Clean, and what that Path to Clean is basically commits us to reducing our emissions, operationally driven emissions, by at least 50% by 2030, and then achieving net zero by 2050. And at Pepco Holdings, you know, we're doing our part to support that broader initiative at Exelon. And starting last year, we introduced a series of climate commitments across all of our jurisdictions. We launched them in DC, in Maryland, and in New Jersey, and we are working to finalize our commitment in Delaware. And the way these commitments are structured is it's really looking first, what can we do? And I think we've heard a lot about what can we do as utilities to be leaders and to drive down our own operational footprints. So we are looking at things like what can we do with our buildings, what can we do with our fleet, what can we do with our electric delivery system? Because being a wires-only utility, similar to Edison and grid, right, we don't own generation. But that doesn't mean that we don't have a footprint and can't achieve our own emission reductions. And the second part of those commitments really focuses on what can we do to help our customers and communities do the same. Again, as the utilities that serve, vast majorities of these jurisdictions, it's really important that we not only align what we're doing with what our jurisdictional goals are, but also understand what our customers want and what our communities need in that process. And so towards that end, we've established these commitments where we're going to achieve at least 50% reduction by 2030 and net zero by 2050, and putting forward the programs across a variety of sectors. And I want to focus a little bit about what we're doing in the District of Columbia, because we just made a filing in the district a few weeks back called our Climate Solutions Plan. And this Climate Solutions Plan was filed at the DC Public Service Commission at their request. They had the foresight to ask the utilities to put forward transition plans. And what's really great about this is that it really, caused us to take a step back and look holistically about what is it that we can do to enable not just the climate goals that the district has, but also the clean energy goals and the milestones along the way, whether that be energy efficiency, transportation electrification, building resilience for communities, doing it equitably, inclusively, and affordably. And so we filed our first 5-year plan. So it was a very detailed plan about what could we do, what are the kinds of programs that we could launch over the next 5 years to drive towards this deep decarbonization and hit these clean energy goals. And so we filed a plan of 62 programs across 4 portfolios. And so the 4 portfolios, I think they're very similar to what you heard. One was, what can we do to help enable transportation electrification? What can we do to drive decarbonization of buildings and create and make them more efficient as we're doing that? What can we do to enable the energy ecosystem, to enable more distributed energy resources and renewable energy on the system? And then finally, what can we do to really invest in the grid so that the grid can really be that connector, can be that platform, and can do it in a way that's not only enables this clean energy future, but does it in a way that's resilient and lasting? Because we know that as climate's changing, and as we electrify more and more, we're going to really need to build deeper levels of resilience into our grid. So what can we do to make the grid smarter, stronger, and cleaner, and better able to be that connector, that platform? And so the role we see ourselves playing and the approach we took really is that of a platform. How can we create those connections, create connections for the grid edge technologies that are going to provide a lot of this deep decarbonization and more affordable energy choices to customers? How can we create those connections among technology providers and customers so that they can actually move forward in a way they need to move forward? And how can we create those connections for our communities so that as we're making this transition, we're doing it equitably, we're addressing community needs like addressing local air quality, and we're building that workforce for the future. And so we're going to be making our filing for a 30-year plan, actually, at the end of November. This is part of a series of filings that we're making in the context of this larger climate solutions plan. And in that plan, we're going to be looking forward in terms of what is it that we can do? What do we think the future holds? What are the kinds of investments we're going to need to make in the out years? And as part of that, we're going to try to identify, again, the jobs that are going to be created, the skill sets that are going to be needed, both for individuals, but also for the local businesses. Because I think as we've heard about this, as we move forward, we need to do so in partnership with our communities and with our local businesses. There's a lot of opportunity there, a lot of opportunity for entrepreneurship, a lot of opportunity for innovation, and a lot of opportunity for partnership. So as we're developing these programs, we're doing so again in coordination with our customers. For example, we're sitting down with our local transit agencies to understand what they need to electrify their fleets, their bus fleets. What kind of rate designs do they need? Where and when do they think they're going to have chargers? How are they going to be charging their vehicles? We're sitting down with our local governments, partners at the District Department of Energy Environment and Sustainable Energy Utility, as they implement a lot of energy efficiency programs today, and a program called Solar for All, which provides solar energy to income-eligible customers. And we're sitting down with other partners and NGOs like affordable housing providers, understanding what do they need to provide more solar to their residents, as well as how can we work with them to deploy battery storage to build resilience going forward. So a lot of exciting things happening in the district, a lot of exciting things happening in the context of our climate solutions plan. And we anticipate we're going to see more of these kinds of requests coming from our other jurisdictions. In fact, the Maryland Climate Change Commission just released a holistic set of recommendations there. And as part of that, they recommended that the commission there ask utilities to file transition plans. So again, a lot more to come. We're really excited about it. We're excited about the infrastructure bill that just passed Congress and was just enacted, because we think it'll provide a lot of support. And I know we're going to talk about that in a little bit. And we're really excited to work with our other utility companies here, learning from each other, sharing best practices, and really driving towards a more decarbonized, more resilient future for everyone. So thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Stepping back and hearing all your presentations, the electric utility scene has changed a lot. I used to look at them as individual silos. And all of you talking about collaboration, reaching out to communities, being concerned about equitable treatment to disadvantaged communities. The innovation and the partnerships you're looking forward in the future is very exciting to hear. And I think it bodes well for success. We're going to turn to maybe discussing the infrastructure bill that was passed last week in Congress. And hopefully we'll... There's an advertisement going on here. We'll be right there. Okay, we're back. The Buildback Better bill, the budget reconciliation bill, has a set of dozens and dozens of programs related to climate, 550 billion thereabouts, give or take 10 billion. Very comprehensive, very exciting. But why don't we take up the infrastructure bill first? I'd like to hear what you believe is going to be most helpful in accelerating your programs and supporting financially your programs. So why don't we start with you, Melissa, and come this way?
Sure, thanks. So I think, again, like you said, there's a lot in the infrastructure bill, a lot on transportation electrification, grid modernization, helping to support the build out of the underlying energy infrastructure, including transmission, to really help make this transformation possible. And one of the things that struck me in the bill is, again, this concept of partnership, right? There are grants that are available, and a lot of the grants require partnership between utilities, local governments, partnership between transit agencies and utilities and governments, et cetera. And so when you take a look at that, right, it's really understanding where can we have the greatest impact, how can we work together to leverage, right, both our expertise but existing funds that we all have, and then where can we go seek out those grants and seek out that support that's going to be made available through the infrastructure bill to help, as Caroline said, drive down costs for customers in our states, right? That's really important. That's where the affordability comes in. So we think that there's a lot of promise in this bill. There's a lot of great opportunity, and we're excited about what we can do, particularly to support our transportation electrification programs and some of that transition in that kind of building decarbonization space and distribution system kind of automation piece of it that will really, I think, facilitate greater amounts of DER on the system.
Thank you. Carolyn?
Yeah, well, maybe just step back a moment and just really relish what a difference a year makes, because it's so wonderful to have the state and federal alignment addressing climate change, really understanding that we are in an emergency situation, a crisis situation, and we have to act with urgency to address it. And I so appreciate the Congress passing the bipartisan infrastructure package. And I think we have a real opportunity with the Buildback Better as well. So just really an acknowledgement. And I just think the president coming in and taking a whole of government approach in every department, really thinking about climate change, both from a mitigation as well as an adaptation, is just remarkable. And it's just really great to see. And I think for our states that in which we operate, a really great opportunity to partner with the federal government, which we haven't seen in a while. So that's just one. I think two, for me, I personally am so excited about all the things that Melissa mentioned, but the electric school bus program. I took the bus when I was a kid. I hated the bus because it smelled so badly. And so, moving to zero emission school buses, I think is going to be so fabulous for those kids who are stuck on those buses, whether getting to school or going to sports programs. And so I think it's $2.5 billion for electric school buses, as well as another $2.5 billion in alternative fuel emission buses that electricity can play a role, can still go forward for that. It's just a significant investment in not just zero emission mobility, but public health as well. So it's just great. And then one more I would just add is the water, because in California, one of the things that we're seeing is as we transition to a clean energy economy and think about what is the role of natural gas, it's definitely more limited going forward as we hit to 2030 and 2045. And so, again, the workforce and the impact on what the workforce will be doing is a significant one that we have to consider. And I think what you see in the infrastructure package is not just around electrification, but the clean water and drinking water continues to provide jobs for plumbers, pipe fitters, the guys and gals who currently put in the natural gas infrastructure. And as those jobs go away, the investment that we're making in public health, again, to remove lead pipe out of existing buildings, which is a significant number, right, is an opportunity to provide jobs for them as natural gas declines. And so I just think, again, it's a thoughtful approach around the way we are going to transition in a way that continues to think about the workforce, training opportunities for these new economies, but as well as existing jobs, providing that work as we move forward towards that clean energy economy. So just a couple of things that we're really excited about.
Great points, great points. Badar?
Yeah, look, I think that getting the infrastructure bill passed is a remarkable achievement, and I agree with Caroline and Melissa. It's something that we should just reflect and feel good about it. It's great to have the federal government aligned with our states. This is a game-changing set of proposed investments that I think that are necessary and important. It's interesting. We are going through we've been talking about a 25 or 30-year transition, and yet we need a sense of urgency today. It's hard to create urgency when you're talking about a 30-year transition. So again, I think it's great that we've got this infrastructure bill passed, and we need to do more. So I know we'll talk about the Buildback Better, but I think that what we've done is a start, but there is more that needs to be done. Just a couple of things I'd bring out is recognizing the need for transmission investment. We're building renewable energy, onshore, offshore, folks are. Timelines for energy supply build-out are actually faster than they are for transmission. If we don't have transmission built out, we will not be able to connect that new supply to where customers are. So the administration's focus on transmission is very appreciated and is needed. And it's not just the timelines, but it's also the siting and permitting issues that go alongside transmission. So the actions on the part of the administration for investment support there, but also the review that the FERC is doing around how do we accelerate transmission, I think is very important. I think that's important. I think also the approach towards whole of government. So looking at every single department to find ways to not just bring about clean energy, but also equity in this transition, I think are aspects of what I think we're hearing that I think we should be applauding and getting right behind.
Thank you, thank you.
I just wanted to kind of build off something Badar said, because I think the build out of transmission is so critical, right? To bring, from those kind of larger scale renewables, right? Bring them to where the population centers are, right? Bring that energy, that clean electricity to where we need it. And at the same time, right, that continued investment on the distribution side, because as Badar noted, and I know Edison has the same thing, and across our companies, right, we've got 80,000 plus distributed energy resources that are interconnected on our distribution side of our grid, and so that distribution side is now turning into its own kind of mini transmission system, if you will, and so how to continue to make that investment. So I think again the dollars that are in there, the grants that are in there for that grid modernization at the distribution side is also critical, and how we kind of work together to make the kind of two pieces fit, so that we can kind of step it down all along the chain is, I think, going to be really important from both a regulatory perspective and a permitting perspective.
Great point, great point. We're going to slide over to the Build Back Better bill, and I guess I want to avoid the conversation around the messy politics. Let's be optimistic. Why don't we, Caroline, maybe you can pick out a few things in that large comprehensive package that you think is really going to be useful for Southern Cal Edison.
Yeah. Well, it doubles down almost on the the infrastructure package with more investments in electrification. So that's one that we're certainly super interested in to see pass. The other is around the tax credits, right? So again, to buy down the cost of energy for us in California, as we go towards 100% clean energy, we have estimated we're going to need 80 gigawatts of utility scale renewables, 30 gigawatts of distributed renewables, 30 gigawatts of energy utility scale storage, and 10 gigawatts of distributed storage. So it's a lot of investment in the infrastructure that the Build Back Better program plan will help for the utilities. So there's just a couple that we're very excited about.
Great points. Great points. Badar?
I mean, just one I bring out. I mean, it certainly doubles down, or more than doubles down, on everything that the infrastructure bill has. But when I look at, if I look at the three sectors: energy supply, transportation, and buildings, and building heat, we have over the last 30 years lowered the costs of renewable energy, so wind and solar, so they're at parity, largely, in some parts of the country with gas-fired generation. And so I think there's a little bit of a nudge that can still be done there. When I look at transportation, yes, the total cost of ownership is not probably a very widely understood concept for most people. They think about the cost of the car up front and don't really think about the ongoing cost. But even still, I think that it's not unreasonable to believe that people will be able to understand TCO, and indeed the costs of batteries are still continuing to fall. And so the cost of that technology versus combustion engines and combustion vehicles is getting to the right place. I think buildings and building heat is the toughest one. Our service territories are up in the northeast, where it gets real cold, very, very cold, much colder than here in Glasgow. And so we need technology that works and is affordable, as we've heard several times. So I think finding ways for us to develop technologies at scale and at a cost that's attractive for reducing emissions in buildings and building heat, I think it's going to be really important over this next decade. And so I'm really excited in some of the work that the government's putting forward in the infrastructure plan, but also in the Build Back Better plan around hydrogen, lowering the costs of hydrogen. So the Department of Energy has a goal to lower hydrogen 80% over this next decade. I think that's a fantastic goal, and one that we need to get behind. I think when the administration gets behind a goal like that, it's more likely that we'll be able to achieve those sorts of outcomes. But the RD&D on those kinds of technologies to be able to get emissions reduction out of building heat, I think is going to be a really important one for us over the next decade.
Melissa?
Yeah, and I just build off what Caroline and Badar said. I agree. I think again, it's sort of a doubling down of the infrastructure bill, which was just awesome that it passed, and that now we're in implementation, which is great. we can move forward with Buildback Better as well, right? It'll just provide some additional resources, and I think the focus again, the PTC and the expansion of the PTC to include other non-emitting generation sources like nuclear, et cetera, I think is very helpful because again, I think it's gonna, right? We know the transition we have to make. We know where we have to get to. We know that zero carbon on the electricity supply. The sooner we get there, the better shot we have, right, of making sure that we can actually hit that, well, maybe 1.5 degrees, hopefully maybe 2 degrees C goal, because we got to get that electricity though out, right, and that's where those investments, right, in the grid, those investments in transmission, those investments in distribution are so critical. And I know I keep kind of going back to that, but I think it's that deployment piece. And that transmission delivery piece that's so important because that's where sometimes, right, the holdup can be. It's the permitting, it's the interconnection, right? It's the cost to kind of build the system out to enable all the distributed energy technologies. So the more cost effectively and the quicker we can build out that underlying infrastructure, that grid, the platform, right, those connection points, actually the quicker we're going to deploy the technologies and the more cost effective those technologies are going to become to actually interconnect to the grid. Because it's that connection piece. It's that connection piece at the grid edge, and it's that connection piece at the home. Because Badar touched on it, it's the affordability of that transition, I think, an electrification of buildings, whether it be business or residence, right? There's that connection piece there that there's a cost to customers. And so how we address, I think, the costs associated with those connection points, bring them down, and figure out a way to, right, kind of accelerate that transition is going to be really, really important.
Can I just add just something to that? We are talking about a significant amount of infrastructure to be built out over the next 30 years. Generation, transmission, and distribution. That is not going to be easy to do. We see transmission projects getting turned down. We saw that actually last week in the state of Maine. This is a project that would have got connected hydropower through Maine into Massachusetts to meet Massachusetts clean energy goals. And so that tells me that, we are here in Glasgow with this sense of urgency, but not everybody's there. And I think that we need to recognize that there are going to be challenges to getting all this infrastructure built, not just in terms of the expense, but also the practical reality. And so one of the things that we've been looking at in our company is we've got infrastructure in the ground, certainly when I go back to the buildings question, which is our gas infrastructure. Can we use some of that infrastructure in the most challenging city, urban environments where it's going to be difficult to electrify buildings and use that infrastructure, the gas infrastructure, not to flow geologic natural gas, but to flow low carbon or zero carbon gas, whether it's renewable natural gas, hydrogen, blended together. And I think that might be an opportunity to accelerate some of this transition without some of the very challenging, practically challenging, expensive infrastructure in the urban city environments. And I think that's a pathway that I think is worth exploring.
I just build on the case on the cost that as much money as we're talking about here between the infrastructure package and the Build Back Better, it still is a down payment on what the cost will be to the transition to a clean energy economy. Just in California alone, we've estimated it's going to cost $250 billion. Now, we're a large state, 5th largest economy in the world, but $250 billion is kind of eye-popping numbers to achieve what we're trying to do here and get to net zero. And that's echoed across the country and echoed across the globe. So we really do have to figure out a way to bring these technologies in at scale to drive the cost down so that we can accelerate from there.
Sure, and just kind of building off that, I love that it's actually called Build Back Better, right? Because that's what we're kind of talking about, right? These costs that we're talking about, the investments, we have to make them anyway, right? We have to make them in our system, if nothing else, but to make them more resilient, right? More resilient in the face of a changing climate. And so as we make those investments, right, how are we going to do it? We could do it in a way, right, that enables this clean energy future. We can do it in a way that enables more electrification. We can do it in a way, right, as Badar said, that, right, you're really focusing on where is the best place to, right, decarbonize, to electrify. How can you then, right, decarbonize a gas system and leverage existing infrastructure and assets? There's a lot we can do, but I think it's important to recognize, right, we all have to make these investments. So it's not whether or not we make an investment and whether or not we spend, money to do that. It's how we spend it. Are we being, judicious about it? Are we doing it in a way that actually enables decarbonization? Are we doing it in a way that, equitably and inclusively makes this transition? And are we doing it as efficiently as we possibly can? And that's where I think, again, these bills are super helpful in doing that. And back to that concept of partnership, of working together with, the technology providers, the end-use customers, right, and governments to take a step back and say, where are we trying to go? What's the best path to get there, and who can do what? That will, I think, get us there as quickly as possible. But it's really aligning around the outcomes and then working back from there to figure out how we can all work together to get there.
Great, great. It's real clear that we have an amazing amount of work ahead of us. It's going to require an incredible and unusual level of cooperation. I am optimistic that the Biden administration is trying to do what it can to I wouldn't call it streamline, but minimize the delays in permitting. They're certainly doing that with offshore wind investments, which is great to see. But as we know, the states play a role as well. A la Maine, it has to be a very broad team of people on the same page wanting to get things done. I'd like to just ask all of you, you've mentioned your programs and your issues when it comes to disadvantaged communities. All three of your service territories have a substantial population of medium to low income people. I'd like to hear a little bit about, how you think you're going to be approaching that.
I'll start. Yeah, thank you. It's a really great question. About a third of our customers are on an income qualified program. Now, that is self-selection, so we're not inquiring whether or not they actually qualify. So a third of our customers, which is a significant number of 5 million accounts, 15 million customers. And so our programs are designed, we have a couple. One certainly is just a discount off the bill. All three investor-owned utilities in California and even the municipals do that. So our discount is a 25% discount off the bill for our income qualified customers. Then we have programs that are specific to income qualified customers to ensure, again, that the communities are not left behind as we transition. So solar rooftops, we have a program that both for single family homes, we'll put solar on the rooftops, as well as multi-unit buildings so that renters can work with their building owner to have the rooftop solar added onto those buildings as well. Again, in disadvantaged communities and for income qualified customers. For appliances, we have an energy savings assistance program that can give customers either at no cost or very low cost electric appliances. Our energy efficiency programs similarly have some that are targeted specifically to our low-income customers, so that help with weatherization before we put in appliances or before we put in the solar, because you want the building envelope to be as efficient as possible before you add in the clean energy. So just a couple of those programs. And then just one more on TE, transportation electrification. We have a rebate that's specifically just to used vehicles. So the state has programs that are for new vehicles and incentives for new vehicles. Our rebate is for used vehicles, and it can go to the owner, the first, second, and third owner of a used electric vehicle. So again, trying to help buy down the cost of a vehicle to ensure that our customers can get into them, not just new.
Yeah, I think that the equity in this transition is hugely important. We've talked about it. Just a couple of examples. We mentioned before that we need to make sure it's not just Tesla drivers that are getting the benefits of clean air through transport electrification. So ensuring that charging stations are in publicly accessible locations, so people that don't have their own private driveway, which is super important. We've been rolling out pole-mounted chargers, which actually we borrowed from California, which are much less expensive, 70% cheaper, publicly accessible location, allows folks who don't have a private driveway to get their vehicle charged. We need to make sure that we're electrifying buses, municipal buses, school buses, for people who don't have the ability to have their own personal vehicle. These are the kinds of things that I think address equity issues. We're excited, actually. One of our school buses that we've been working on is now sending power back to the grid, which I think is the first example of an electric school bus sending power back to the grid and getting a financial incentive to see that encouraged. Energy efficiency is a hugely important area. The reality is, when we offer our energy efficiency incentives, the vast majority of that goes to people that own their homes. We've already got a home ownership disadvantage in the United States, where black and brown communities tend to rent rather than own, and tend to therefore not qualify for some of the traditional energy efficiency programs. So specifically looking at ways to target, well, to ensure that renters aren't precluded from these programs, or they're not precluded because they don't meet financing criteria, but then specifically targeting renters with energy efficiency programs, I think, is an important part of what needs to be done. The last thing I just say is just the job creation. There will be jobs created, and certainly in our states, our state officials, electeds, regulators are thinking about how do we ensure that the new jobs that are created are more diverse than the jobs today. I can't tell you the number of times I've spoken out. I've met folks in the field who've said that they are grateful for having had a 40-year career with our company. And if it weren't for that 40-year career, they wouldn't have been able to put their kids through college. The reality is, most of the folks that I talk to who've told me those stories are white men. And I think about the opportunity for us to be able to provide opportunities like that, 40-year careers, where their children are going to college, for folks, black and brown communities in urban locations and disadvantaged locations. I think that is a potential game changer. That is a society-wide changer for us. And again, I think it's an opportunity that we can get after here.
Yeah, and just kind of building off that, I think we think about it in sort of those different buckets, right? It's what are the programs and initiatives that can help with affordability, right, for income eligible customers, right? What can we do to ensure that, right, income eligible customers, kind of low moderate income communities, black and brown communities, actually benefit, from this transition to a clean, resilient energy future, right? And how can we create agency in the process? Because at the end of the day, right, you want to create that, that generational wealth. You want there to be agency ownership going forward. And so think about it in the programmatic, right, similar to what Carolyn and Badar said, right? We have programs across our jurisdictions that focus on, reducing the rate. In DC, actually, there's a low income rate that completely zeroes out the distribution charge for a customer. We're about to propose a low income rate in Maryland. Our other jurisdictions have, similar kinds of constructs. In DC, they have the Solar for All program, which again, for income eligible customers, has community solar program, essentially can almost zero out your generation on your bill. So when you sort of think about that transition right there, that's a huge chunk off your bill. Similar programs we have in New Jersey, you're starting up community solar in Maryland, Delaware. And then, energy efficiency, a lot of the programs targeted income eligible renters. Right, how can we make sure that we're just, making the homes or their apartments most efficient, and then, getting them on the right rates to drive down the cost, right, and then creating, right, additional disposable income you can spend on other things. Think about workforce. We have some really leading workforce programs, including in DC, our DC Infrastructure Academy, which is more than just a training program, it's a jobs program. Basically, any successful graduate at the end of that program is guaranteed a job offer with either Pepco or one of our contractors of choice. And so today, we've placed more than 120 DC residents. And so again, this is a great program we're trying to scale up. And we have similar partnerships and programs in other jurisdictions, including a program in New Jersey and in Delaware that we just started. So again, making sure that, as we're making these investments, and again, as we're making investments, in our jurisdictions, that the money is going back into the communities, right? That's really important. And then when I think of kind of the ownership and agency piece, right, it's building capacity. It's contracting with local suppliers, with local diverse businesses, and making sure, again, building that capacity making sure we've got programs that can create mentorship programs with smaller businesses, right, from, diverse communities where we can then, make sure that we're helping them understand what does it take to get a contract? How can we hook you up with the employees that you need? So all of that kind of goes back, and one other thing I'll just kind of mention is Exelon just announced actually the creation of a racial equity capital fund for this building agency, building equity, $36 million fund across all of our utilities. We're, again, trying to build businesses that can actually, help with this clean energy future. So again, a lot out there, a lot to do, but I think if you sort of think of it in those buckets, there's a lot of opportunity.
Well, I'm very impressed with your approaches to deal with equity. I'm also really impressed with your approaches to deal with driving down carbon emissions, the comprehensive approach you're taking. It's rather inspiring. And I think with companies like yours, hopefully there's going to be many more in the States and other places, that can really wrestle with these key issues and accelerate the goals that we're talking about today. Maybe in a year or two, we'll be talking about even more aggressive goals because it'll be more clear to us that we can get there. So thank you to ERM and Ceres and We Mean Business for supporting this session. And I look forward to hearing more down the line from all three of you. Thank you again.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.